anytime I was out on a Friday or Saturday night in Sydney, you know, sort of like chatting up boys, every man I ever met who found out I worked at Dolly, that was always their first question. Are the Dolly doctor problems real? They were so real.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where I have candid conversations with people who have a story to tell. Jo Elvin can't remember what she was wearing the day that she got sacked from her job as the editor-in-chief of iconic English fashion magazine Glamour, which is kind of weird because Jo Elvin loves clothes, and she's also the creator of the hashtag #ClothesMyHusbandHates on Instagram. Look it up, it's brilliant. But not only has Jo forgotten what she was wearing when she got called into her boss's office to have her career and identity turned upside down last year, she can't remember much of that day at all. For 17 years, Jo had been the launch editor and then the editor-in-chief of Glamour Magazine, which at the time was published by Condé Nast, still is. It's the same company who published Vogue. Jo's actually a Sydney girl though. She started her magazine career at Dolly Magazine, RIP, and she'd moved to London for an adventure and to further her career in journalism before she landed the editorship of Glamour. It was a huge gig. I remember being a magazine editor at the time and reading Jo's editor's letters and feeling such a vicarious thrill that one of the biggest and most brilliant magazines in the world was being edited by an Aussie. But in the great magazine apocalypse of the last few years, which has seen so many mags close or really, really drastically reduce their circulation, including our own beloved Dolly, Cleo and Cosmo, in 2017, it was Glamour's turn, and Jo and her whole team were let go. So how do you handle a setback like that, a really big setback, in your 40s? A time in your career where your kids are a little bit older, if you have them, and you're ready to lean in. You're really good at what you do, and you have a hell of a lot to offer. How do you pick yourself back up from such a professional and personal setback, especially when it's so humiliatingly public? Jo and I first met on social media and we followed each other's careers, and we have many magazine friends in common. We've caught up in person the last few times she's been back in Australia to see her family, and she's a bloody hoot. So this time I dragged her into the Mamma Mia studio and I plonked her in front of a microphone to spill about magazines, celebrities, motherhood, and what happens when your life gets turned upside down one day. Jo Elvin, tell me about the day that you learned you would no longer be editing Glamour magazine.
Well, that was an interesting day. I had just got back from the fashion shows and they said, it would be great. The boss needs to see you tomorrow for a bit of a catch-up. He hasn't had a chance to chat to you about a few things. And I thought, well, I was sitting next to him at several shows over the weekend. So we did have a few chances to catch up. So I was a bit like, something's afoot.
How long had you been editing Glamour at that stage?
17 years. Oh, it's crazy, isn't it? And it's funny, because I don't think I would have left of my own volition in a way. And I mean, it's, in fairness to say, look, they sort of said, this is what we're doing. The business is changing. I completely understood. It wasn't.
Wait, I want to know what happens.
Yeah,
when you
I'm
walk
getting
in
there.
there.
No, but it was I just need to tell you the context so that I feel like I'm being fair. But it wasn't making the ad money it used to. You know what print media is like.
Yeah, it's the dying days of magazines.
And I think they just it was just losing money. And so
and you knew that because you were the editor.
Yeah, so I kind of thought that, I don't know, when they said, oh, he wants to catch up with you, I thought, these days it's never to say, just think you're awesome and here's another 20 grand. Do you know what I mean? It was always bad news. It was always, you need to make some more cost cuts. So I thought it was just one of those conversations. It turns out the cost cut was me.
Did you feel nervous going into that meeting?
No, I felt kind of a bit depressed because I just knew that whatever it was going to be not great news. And it was just that they were changing the business. They didn't fold the magazine. They scaled it back to 2 print issues a year, beauty content only, and mostly an online beauty-only focused content. So when the conversation was, your role is at risk, which is the legal parlance, it was, I don't know, it was the right decision for them and it was the right decision for me. But it didn't make it any less terrifying at the time because my God, my own daughter had only ever known me as the editor of Glamour. She was born during that time. And I think I stayed there for longer than I probably should have anyway. But I think it was because I was thinking, well, the minute I'm not the editor of Glamour, it'll be like I've died. I honestly believed that the phone would never ring again and no more emails would ever get answered. And also it was easy to stay in that job because I loved it so much. So it was safe. It felt terrifying to test my identity out of that. So I suppose I'd say for the last 2 or 3 years, I knew I probably should go, but I didn't know what that would look like. So just being really honest, I was kind of afraid. So in a way, as horrible as it was, for everybody who, a lot of people lost their jobs at that point, not just me. I just couldn't have imagined leaving of my own volition in any other way. So once I'd got over the shock and awe, and I suppose at first what was the worst thing for me was just I'd kind of knew the business. I knew that writing was on the wall, but there was a lot of young, very shocked, very scared faces in the office the day that everybody was told. And I just felt so responsible, even though it was market forces that I tried really hard to fight and I couldn't. And so I spent a lot of time trying to help them, and it was almost like it was like when the emergency mask comes down on the plane, fit everybody else's mask first. So I busied myself doing all of that, giving people contacts, just talking people through it and all that sort of thing. And then I think about 6 weeks later, it was like, oh, fuck, what am I going to do? And it was like, but there was a lot of relief as well.
So it wasn't that you were told we're replacing you with a younger model.
No.
It was that the whole magazine is going to effectively be wound down.
Yeah, the business is completely changing. And, they just could not. I'd been there a long time, quite an old bird, quite expensive. They couldn't sustain the business model that had been successful for so many years. And that included, yes, ultimately, they didn't replace me with somebody younger, but, they completely reset all the salaries and all that sort of thing. So, yeah.
When was the heyday of UK Glamour?
Oh, gosh. I mean, when we launched in 2001, I remember I'd been on a magazine called New Woman, and we were selling about 30,000 copies a month.
Wow.
And that was seen as a big magazine. And I remember thinking that was like a huge achievement. I think the benchmark at the time was Marie Claire was on about 450, Cosmo was around there. And so when they sort of said, oh, we'd really like to sell 500,000 copies, I was sort of sitting there thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get fired in about 6 weeks after this.
So they poached you, or it was the same company?
No, it was a different company. It was Condé Nast. I'd worked at EMAP. And when they asked me to join, Glamour, US Glamour was the magazine that I just thought was amazing. So I couldn't believe that I would get to be part of this brand and part of that team. And, Condé Nast was this fabulous company that everybody wanted to work for. So that was really exciting. And I think the week we launched, they had to print hurriedly another 50,000 copies just to keep up with demand. So, I mean, I thought that if we were doing a good job, we'd sell about 350,000, and the first one sold 550,000.
And I remember very well, I was editing Cosmo at the time, and it was very exciting that this new magazine had an Australian editor, and it was handbag size, which was really different to everything else on the market.
Yeah, it was. And I think it was so funny, because I remember that was one of the things that excited me about it, because it was so hard to have standout. There were so many. A lot of your younger listeners will have no idea how many magazines there were in those days.
And they all back then had tip-ons on the front of them, like a mascara or a tote bag or a pair of thongs or a hairbrush.
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah, free magazine with this lipstick.
Also known as bribery.
Yeah, it was amazing, actually. And it was really great fun to be a part of. And I couldn't believe the size. And I remember before it launched, everybody saying to us, you're insane. I was on a stage on some panel thing with Felix Dennis, sort of legendary publishing man since, RIP, not with us anymore. And in front of an audience, he said, you're an idiot. It's going to get lost on the newsstand. It was such a foreign concept that we would do something much smaller than...
What was the thinking behind it?
Standout, ironically, even though people were saying, no news agent will know how to stock this. But it was just, I think it was a crowded market. You needed something that was like, oh, okay, this is different. It's worth picking up to have an initial look at.
And it was thick. It wasn't that it was like half the size or 2/3 of the size of a regular magazine and skinny. It was really chunky.
It was, yeah.
So it felt substantial. Remember that? Were advertisers resistant because, a smaller format, their ads didn't look as big and beautiful as they did in bigger magazines?
There was always, I'm not going to say who, but there was always a small group of brands who resisted all the way along. And, you just can't please everybody, can you? But there was certainly, you couldn't deny the power and the numbers and the audience that it had. So some of our naysayers changed their mind. Some of them never did. Some advertisers just did not want to see their ads in that format. And that's,
So in 2001 and the sort of 10 years that followed almost, probably 5 years, Glamour was the hot product, not just in the UK but internationally. I know that everyone was looking at it. Everyone was looking at you. What were those days like when there was no social media, when magazine editors were the influencers, the YouTubers, the vloggers, the bloggers, the real stars, the celebrities of that time? It can be hard to explain to someone who's, younger than about 30 or 35. What did it feel like to be that person?
It's funny to hear you describe it that way. I mean, I certainly had fun. God, we did a television show that was all about the magazine. I did all sorts of mad, glamorous things. And
what were some of the mad, glamorous things?
We got Terry Hatcher, who was on Desperate Housewives, to guest edit, and it meant me going and spending a week with her. And I got papped with her when we were out hiking in the hills one day. And I was on a RAF jet having a vodka and tonic and interviewing Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister at the time. It was like crazy stuff like that.
Because women's magazine editors were seen as the voices of women.
Yeah. And I think in some respects they still are. But there's just, they're
not. The editor of UK Vogue's a man.
Yeah, but what I mean is, I edit a Sunday supplement magazine with 2 million readers. And so I still feel, in fact, I feel more respected and more turned to now than I did in the heyday of Glamour. And that's a print magazine. It's a juggernaut. It's attached to a huge brand, Mail on Sunday. So I don't think those days are entirely over. And you say that, the editor of Vogue is a man, but my God, he's a rock star. He's a celebrity.
Yeah, but he's not the voice of women.
No, of course not. But he is the voice. He's definitely seen as the voice of fashion.
Well, something else that's hard to explain to people who are younger is how, because women's magazines sort of died a slow and sad death, really, mainstream ones like the ones that you and I edited, and most of them are closed now, the Cosmos, the Cleos, the Dollys, the Girlfriends, the Glamours. Back then, that was the only place you could read about all the things to do with women, from feminism to, you would be interviewing the Prime Minister, and now he would probably go and talk to some YouTuber.
Or Mumsnet or something.
Or Mamma Mia. But back then it would be all the things about career, about breast cancer, about every kind of women's issue would be championed by magazines and their editors as the spokespeople.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that now, obviously, the difference is that there's just so much content you can access without paying for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of sad that we have devalued content in that way. I think that it's, I think it's a shame because, as an example, I remember there was a huge beauty brand came to see us, a group of international glamour editors, not long before I left. And he was explaining that they love using Instagrammers to talk about their brands. Of course they do, like everybody. But he was finding that the really good ones were super expensive and the sort of like the mid-tier ones weren't as expensive. But they didn't have the knowledge of me and my team when it came to all that beauty journalism. So could we spend some time training these influencers?
To take all your advertising revenue. And
I was like, I could see one of my bosses just glaring at me. So I was like, hand up. But why would we do that? Why? Oh, I don't think you should see them as your rivals. I was like, I think they are. You've just sort of explained that they are. But so I just thought that was so interesting that there's still this respect for the trained people who've spent years learning their craft and got these very sort of like minority coveted jobs. But they still sort of think, yeah, but we're still going to go and spend our money over here. And that was a very depressing day.
You said that the internet has sort of devalued content and no one wants to pay for anything anymore. I think it's also rendered editors obsolete because we're all the editors of what we read every day. It used to be that you'd get, your issue of Cosmo or your issue of Marie Claire or Glamour, and it would be, this is what Jo Elvin thinks. She's chosen 25 stories and fashion shoots, and she, along with her team, have decided, put together a package of things for you to read this month. And now every time we pick up our phones, we are curating and editing what we click on, what we like, who we follow. And that's a massive shift too, isn't it? So it's like we got disseminated as editors.
But I'm always, for me, I'm an editor, but I kind of also want editors because, yes, absolutely, you can curate your own feed and your own content. But how do I then learn new things? How do I stop going to the same things that I already know? So I'm always looking for experts. But I always see you as the face of this whole incredible empire. So, and I think that you've got a friend of mine I was told you, fully losing her shit that I'm coming to do this podcast today because she just thinks that you are that person. So I think that it's still possible to have those beacons and those influencers, even though we all sort of like feel a bit funny about that word.
It's hilarious being called an influencer at age 47 when you're like, but I'm a journalist, or that's not what I think
it's become a bit of a.
But that's what we were. As editors.
It's become a crass term when if you strip it back to being someone who influences, it's just a fact. It's just what you do.
I think that's true. I think that in terms of looking for curation, I know more and more now. There's too much information out there. Yeah. I don't want the burden of having to choose what I'm going to read. I want someone to just say, here are the 10 things you should read today.
Yeah. Well, but that's what you do.
Yeah, that's what we try to do.
That's what we love about what you do. What I think as well is I'm just a little bit jaded about sort of influencers, the new definition of that, because I just feel like what I think we've lost with turning our backs slightly on traditional media is I look at Instagram and it's, here's the free holiday that I'm on and here's the outfit I look great in and here's the sexy boyfriend I've got and here's my world and how it's really working really well for me, thank you very much. But I think that magazine editors, particularly as we were talking about all the old Westie magazine editors like me, it was very much more for here's what we think is good for you. Here's how we think you will look good. Here's somewhere you can go on holiday and here's how you can afford it. And I think that I definitely think particularly in the teen media space, there's not that nurturing and there's not that feeling of sort of like inclusivity and giving someone a bit of a hug via media.
How did you get started at Dolly? How did you get a job there, you lucky thing?
It was a lot of persistence. I was at home in Warrington and I was on my holidays.
The western suburbs of Sydney.
Oh, yes. I was on my holidays from university and I was just cold calling loads of places trying to get work experience everywhere from, I really did want to work in magazines, so I was ringing Clio, Cosmo, Dolly, TV hits, smash hits, but also ringing PR companies, music companies. I don't know where I got that sort of fearlessness. I think it was my father had a real sort of like disrespect for people who wouldn't look out. He would have people phoning him saying, can my son come and do work experience? And he used to hate that. He was like, if your son phones me. So I was like very much like, oh, well, they can't see me. What have I got to lose? And I'd been doing this for weeks. And everyone was saying, sorry, we're booked up. And I'm telling you.
What were you asking for? A job?
A week's work experience. And I don't know, there was just one day when I was super bored at home and I was really gripped. It was almost like a psychic thing. It was just ring Dolly, just one more time. And I know now that it was Nina Frickberg. Do you know her? She was a PA there at the time. She went on to become very successful in music publicity. And I could she just went, oh, I don't see why not. Can you come in on Monday? And it was like, and so that was it. I just went in for work experience. And the first day there, I didn't get to go, but I remember, this is how old I am. The first day there, one of the writers was going off that day to interview Bros, who were in Sydney.
Wow.
And she hated them. They were really jet lagged and tired and moody. So that was like so exciting that, hearing all this sort of like behind the scenes gossip.
Ross.
But I did go with her to interview Anthony Edwards, who was in ER and Top Gun and all that. And he was lovely.
How old were you?
I was 18.
And was it what you thought it would be going into the offices?
It was
Park
so
Street?
much better. I mean, I just couldn't get enough. And I think I'd been there a week. And towards the end of the first week, they asked me to find a girl in the outback who worked on a sheep station. Being magazine. She's got to be about this age. She's got to be, reasonably attractive. And there was no Google in those days, kids. So I was sitting with the switchboard women upstairs, right at the very top, with all the different state phone books and doing what I'd done a week before, phoning ranchers and going, this probably sounds a bit dodgy. She's like, have you got any girls? It was like,
and are they attractive?
Yeah. I'm working at Dolly Magazine, blah, 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 blah. And I must have done that for a day and a half. And got them about 5 girls that sounded good. And this is, by the way, the editor at the time she'd come from business journalism, and I don't think she was that popular with the team. And everyone was sort of like rolling their eyes at, it's just too hard to do this thing. So when I found these girls, they were like, bloody hell, can you like just come in like a day a week or something? I was like, oh my God. So I begged and begged all my university tutors at where I was to please, and there was one guy who was quite resistant to it, but I just wasn't going to take no for an answer. So I managed it so that I could get all my university courses done Monday to Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday I was on that train and I was in Dolly as much as possible, and it was fabulous. And then there was one day, I think I'd been doing that about 6 months, and I turned up one day, and Julianne, who was the PA at that time, said, just keep your head out the way. There's something really heavy going on. And the editor was standing over the 2 writers. They would been dismissed because they tried to stage some sort of a coup.
Go Dolly.
Yeah. I hope this is not illegal for me to... No, so long ago. And she was sort of going, right, you've got 5 minutes, And they were sort of like packing up their desks. And out of necessity, they were just sort of said, Joanne, no one called me Jo in those days, Joanne, can you just write a few of the furniture pages? And there's that stayed on. And then...
The furniture pages?
Like... the regular pages.
Oh, right. I was like, I don't remember Dolly having a furniture page.
You should get this Eames chair, girls, for your study.
IKEA bookshelves. Great idea.
So the careers pages, the Vox Pops, all that sort of thing. So
the regular pages, stock pages.
Sorry,
we
furniture.
Used to call them.
I've been in Britain too long. And then Marina Go was made the editor. She'd been the beauty editor. And she offered me a job.
So you just got your foot in the door.
Yeah.
Wedged it there.
And chained myself.
Jimmied it open and tied yourself to a desk until someone offered you a job.
Yeah. And I was there for about 3 years. So it was, God, that was a fun job. And it was a really great time to be there, actually. Marina had sort of like really increased the circulation. She'd sort of brought in this team of people who were all really hungry for it. I don't know if you know Eileen Marr, Carlotta Moy, all of these people. And
the glory days.
Yeah, it was such a brilliant time to be there.
Tell people once and for all, are the Dolly Doctor letters, were they made up?
They were not made up. And can I tell you, anytime I was out on a Friday or Saturday night in Sydney, sort of like chatting up boys, every man I ever met who found out I worked at Dolly, that was always their first question. Are the Dolly Doctor problems real? They were so real.
It helped boys with sex education because they read their sisters' copies.
Yeah, exactly. But people used to phone as well. I remember I was there I wonder what happened to this girl. I was there one weekend working, and the phone rang. Hello, Dolly, as we always said. And there was this silence, and this girl just went, when you get your period. And I went, what? And then she hung up. And then so I was sort of in shock, and I realised, oh, God, this poor girl's out there. She's probably taken a week to build up the courage to phone and ask about that. And I've just gone, what? So I hope she's all right, wherever she is.
Wherever she is. I mean, when people say were they made up, of course I knew that they weren't as well, but you didn't need to make them up because when there's no Google, how else do you know what to do when one boob's bigger than the other? Or when you don't get your period or you're not sure which hole the tampon goes in? Yeah,
exactly. And so that postberg was just, it was exploding all the time. We did have to be slightly careful in the days before internet trolling. Every now and again, I think there was one time when we realised that they were girls writing in and being mean and sort of like, writing a letter like, I don't know which hole to put the tampon in and signing it from some girl who they were bullying. And, it was like there was a lot of that going on that we had to be careful about.
Creative bullying via Dolly Doctor.
Analog bullying.
How did you get to the UK and why? Was it for love? It usually is.
No, it wasn't.
That's not a very feminist question then, is it?
I don't know. It's why did I go to the UK? Because I wanted to see the world. I always felt like I was missing out. I think a lot of Aussies feel like that. It's just so far away, isn't it? And I was obsessed with British media. The magazines are like things like Sky and 19 and things like that, and The Face were all really killing it, and we, quote unquote, were inspired by them, ripped them off wholesale all the time. And I think a lot of the people at Dolly, I'd say, it's just things like, oh, wow, where'd you get that jacket? Oh, London, Paris. And be like, oh, my God, I just kind of was with all these glamorous women who'd done all these amazing things, and that was quite inspiring. And so I initially wanted to go to America, but then someone said, you'll never get a work visa for there, but you can go to London. And so that was okay. That was great. So I went. I did the backpacking pub job thing, thinking I'd go for a couple of years. And then I don't really know. And then while I was there, I did meet my husband. But, I got my foot in the door there with a job on a magazine called TV Hits, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, and worked for that company for a long time and launched Sugar Magazine with them. And I don't know, my life just got on that track and hasn't got off it. And being here this week when it's winter, but the weather has been unbelievable, and we've sort of been walking around Tamarama and all this sort of thing, and saying to my husband, oh God, this is just, why didn't we do this years ago? I do miss it a lot.
Your mum's still here?
Yeah, my parents are, my whole family's here. I got a brand new nephew this week. So it's a really nice time to be here. But I don't know, my life's there now. My daughter's 14. She's halfway through high school. I don't know, maybe one day. But, in all seriousness, though, I don't know if you have felt this. But, I mean, you've always been a blazing star. But I don't know, there was definitely a time where I felt that I was stagnating a bit here career-wise. And
small pond, you mean?
Yeah. I don't know if I mean that. I just think that I was not getting the jobs that I wanted to get. And it felt like a lot of people were saying to me, there's just something about you just don't get as much respect unless you've done something abroad. And a lot of people were saying that to me. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go and get some London on the CV and, see what happens. But I just never came back.
I was planning to do that just before I met my husband and got pregnant and got the Cosmo gig. I was on my way to New York.
Yeah, God.
That's what I was obsessed with.
New York was just not ready, Mia.
And that's my sliding doors moment. But then I had the opportunity to go back. I was offered a couple of other jobs later on, and I decided, I like here.
I got offered a job in New York many years ago, and and said yes, and then changed my mind.
Why?
So that was a sliding doors thing, because it was in the golden days of Glamour, and they made me a very attractive offer to stay. And I suppose it wasn't just staying for that money, but it was more, I just had my baby. She was about 6 months old, and I suddenly was like really freaking out about being in America where you get 2 weeks vacation. And how am I going to manage having family in 2 different countries and
living in a third? Yeah.
And I actually started to get really scared about everything I'd heard about working in New York and you never see your family, and I don't know how true it all was anyway.
Yeah,
but
no, I agree. That's part of why I didn't go as well.
Yeah, so when they sort of said, hey, if you stay, it just made it really easy. So, but yeah, it's definitely, I don't regret not going, but every now and again you think, I wonder what that would have been like, so.
Did you find it hard to imagine how you could leave your magazine to have a baby, or was that just me?
I don't know. I think I was 35 when I had Evie. I remember my boss at the time when I told him.
Why did you wait until then?
Because I'm just very good at letting life just slip on.
So it wasn't that you tried and just couldn't get pregnant?
No. And in fact, I think my husband was very upset. I'd sort of said to him, look, it might take us 2 years. It took about 4 months. He was like, what happened to all this practice sex we're going to? I was like, oh, sorry, it just worked straight away. It's like, obviously we're both very fertile, but I I think if I'd waited much longer, I wouldn't have been able to have one. So I think it was that, okay, so we're going to have a kid, or so well, actually, I'm 34. We kind of probably better get on with it. But I wasn't.
How long had you been together?
God. So she was 05. We'd been together a long time. We'd been together since 93. I can't do maths.
Oh, wow. So you've been together for 12 years.
Something like that. Yeah.
But you knew he was the one?
Yeah, and I think I just always felt like a kid myself. It was like, how am I going to keep another thing alive? I can't keep a plant alive, So I was always a little bit scared of it. I knew I wanted to do it. I would have liked to have had another one, but that didn't really work out.
Why didn't you have another one?
Because it just tried
Didn't
and couldn't.
work.
Yeah.
I was about to say, how hard did you try? As if, did you try hard, Jo?
Oh,
Did you really try
I tried
hard?
super hard.
Or did you just give it a half-assed attempt?
No, I put welly into that one. Yeah.
Because it was so easy the
Do you want me
first
to draw
time.
some diagrams?
Please do.
Yeah.
Because they call that secondary infertility, don't they? Where you got pregnant easily the first time, 4 months,
Yeah.
no worries.
And then they said, you could get pregnant, but you definitely need IVF. And I just thought, I'm just not up for that. I mean, I know some people are. I just financially, emotionally, physically, just not up for it. It's like, we'll have one. It'll be fine.
Are people got a lot of opinions about you having one child?
Jesus Christ, yes. And it's so interesting because a friend of mine, when she got pregnant with her fourth, people were very rude about that as well.
Yeah, I have a friend who said the same thing.
So, I mean, but people are like, people that you don't know would say things like, oh, couldn't you have any more?
Well, I just said that pretty much.
Yeah, no, you didn't. You didn't phrase it that way. I did. I've never been more startled, though, that I've written about this than the woman who said, well, when you think about it, what you're doing with having one child is committing a form of child abuse.
Stop it.
Yeah, that floored me. And she's lucky that I was on my third glass of wine and I was just kind of dumbstruck. Because it was only but when I woke up the next morning, I was like, oh my God.
What was her argument?
That it's cruel for my daughter, for her to not have any siblings.
Oh, it's my eldest child's dream, was to be an only child.
I don't know. I just think that there's pros and cons. I think that when I went to school, there was one only child and she was the weirdo. So I was always a bit like, oh God, what if I have the weirdo? But the only thing I'd say about her is I've noticed, and she says herself now, she's 14 and very sentient, she's much more comfortable in the company of adults, which I find quite, and so all my friends think she's great because she's quite articulate and funny and all of those things. She's got friends, but she herself prefers adult conversations.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think it's fine ultimately. Yeah.
What are the great things about having just one kid?
Can fly to Sydney without crippling ourselves, holidays are cheaper. I feel like it's probably bad for her. Sometimes I think it would have been nice to have more than one because I'm obsessed with her and that must be awful for her. Do you know what I mean? I worry. It's my Olympic sport. It's my gold medal event. So sometimes I think for my benefit and for hers, it would have been nice if I had somebody else to split the worry between. And I think sometimes, we've got to this situation where we take one of her mates on holiday because she gets bored to death with us. So that's really nice. So sometimes I feel like that's a problem, but I don't know. What can you do?
Well, you've also got nothing to compare it to.
It just didn't work out.
This is just it.
Yeah, so it's fine. And I grew up I'm one of four, and I grew up in a super chaotic, noisy house. I quite like that we've got a quiet house. So, yeah. How many have you got?
I've got 3, but my first is almost like an only child because he was 8 when the second came along.
Yeah.
So back to the meeting that you had when you found out that your job and your magazine were no longer. Do you remember what you were wearing that day?
I don't, It's so funny because it's so funny you say that because it was only popped into my head the other day that I could not remember. But I do remember saying to my husband in the morning, what do you think? Is this a good outfit to get fired in?
Really?
But I can't remember what it was. I can't remember.
Because you famously have a hashtag, clothes my husband hates.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that happened.
Well, you know what he hates more than my clothes? It's that hashtag. It's because he's sort of famous. He's a social media ghost. He's got no Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, none of that. He hates all of that stuff. So when we meet people for the first time and they go, oh, you're the husband. What do you think of what she's wearing? He's just cringing. I don't know how that came about. He's always pre-Instagram, always had a funny little aside. I used to have a really nice Marc Jacobs jacket. It was white denim, had sort of like marching band details, stitching on it. And he used to call it my Buck Rogers in the 25th century jacket because it looked like something from that show. Do you remember? And every time I read it, I go, "Oh, Buck Rogers is coming out today." You know, he was always had stuff like that. And then when I joined Instagram, it just became a way to. It was good material for captions. And
because it's so, Man Repeller is similar in the sense that it really highlights that we're not dressing for men. We're not dressing for the male gaze. We're dressing for other women.
Yeah.
We're dressing for ourselves.
Absolutely.
We're dressing because it feels creative. And maybe we want to look like Buck Rogers in the 21st century.
He had it
today.
going on, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. But you don't remember that day?
No, I really don't.
Who was the first person you called when you walked out?
Oh, my husband. Because he knew I had this meeting. He knew I was nervous about it.
Did you cry in the meeting?
No. Oh God, I was so proud of myself for that as well. I don't know. Is that? I did cry the next day when I was addressing the staff because I just felt so responsible for all these terrified faces.
So he said to you, the magazine's basically folding and you've got to sack your team. And
No.
and you're out
It
of a
wasn't
job.
like that. It was just he told me ahead of announcing to my team and the media that there was this restructure happening.
Oh, a restructure.
Yeah. So no, it wasn't up to me to do all of that.
Right.
But it was tough. I mean, I think that they saved. I think there was a handful of jobs saved, but less than half. So.
What did you say in that meeting? Like in the worst meeting of your life?
Which meeting are you talking about?
The one where you were told this news.
Absolutely nothing. I just took it in. I just thought I don't trust myself to not cry. To not say something really arsey that I might regret later. Let's not burn bridges. Let's stay friends. I don't know. I just kind of, because I know what I'm like. I've got a bad temper. I'm very highly strung and emotional. So there are certain situations where even though later I think, oh, why didn't you say that? Or why didn't you say that? I just kind of needed to sit with it and react in my own time. So I don't know. It's really, I've never been asked that before about it. I just thought I've just got to get through this and then go home and process this complete life change.
Did you feel sort of betrayed and humiliated that you'd been sitting next to him in the shows and he obviously knew that this was happening?
I suppose I did feel a bit stupid, but then Mia, you're a boss. I've been in similar situations myself. He must have been dying.
Yeah.
So,
and he probably couldn't tell you, obviously.
As much as it's awful, that feeling, I've also been on the other side of that. So
having to let people go.
Yeah, and so I don't really hold any malice or grudge about that. But it's just that I just knew. I thought, you have had time to talk to me. So this is obviously something not great. But yeah.
Did you leave the office straight away?
Yeah, I did because they didn't want me to talk to anyone.
Or cry in front of anyone?
Well, they didn't want me to talk to anyone ahead of them handling that message. So, and that was awful as well because I didn't want to put anybody else's, redundancy package in jeopardy or anything like that. So I just removed myself from the situation. But of course, everybody knew I was going to this meeting, and then everybody knew I hadn't come back. And nobody was getting answers to their texts going, just checking you're okay. So so it was horrible. It was a horrible 24 hours.
Was it hard telling your daughter?
It's interesting that because it did take me a few days to tell her because I wanted to feel resilient, and I didn't want to be. She was, she's can be quite a worrier. So I don't know why. It took me a few days to tell lots of people. I just need, what it's like when you just need time to process yourself. And I think it was the third day that I was home at 3:00 in the afternoon. She went, why are you home again? Because, that's just so unusual. And I just said, well, and she went, oh. And I said, yeah. And I said, but it's fine. It's fine. And sort of explained it all. But that was really interesting because I've been fired before, properly fired. We don't like you anymore. Piss
What's
off.
that like?
Well, I was much younger. I was 28 and it had never happened to me before. I'd always been head girl, golden girl, and that was dreadful. And I did not handle that very well for a few weeks. That took a lot of recovery to come back from. So I'd had that lesson And I think that this time, having my daughter, who was like, 12, 13, I really wanted to handle it. I really wanted her to see that you can have setbacks, but it's fine. So that was quite inspiring and motivating for me to handle it well. So, yeah.
And there's also a degree of performance that you have to, you know, you don't want her to see you crying in the fetal position or all the self-doubt that you might have.
Yeah. And it's funny, you know, the thing that kept me awake at night was I didn't particularly love their idea for the business model. And I just sort of like kept lying awake thinking, how's it going to work? And I don't know what I was thinking, but it's not your problem. Yeah, but how's it going to work? And that was my 4 o'clock in the morning head rants. It wasn't, shit, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't know. I think I'd worked so hard for so long. I was for a long time kind of excited about having a rest.
Yeah.
So it was fine. But then I think I'd been off the payroll 2 weeks when I got a call from the Mail on Sunday about, do you want to come and do this?
Job.
Yeah.
So you only had a short period of existential identity angst.
I had about 4 months where I didn't do much except I've got a podcast with a friend of mine. And in fact, that started life as a Glamour product.
It did.
And that was another reason I'm really glad I didn't lose it in that meeting, because I had to put on my big girl pants and email that boss later and say, listen, you guys don't really prioritise this, but I kind of love it and I've poured everything into it. Can I have it, please?
Yeah, I noticed that you took the podcast with you.
And they let us have it. It was, towards the end, it was the only thing I was super loving about my job was doing the podcast. So
I could tell as an early listener to that podcast that it seemed to revitalise you, and then I thought it was really interesting that you got to take it after you left.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it washes its face. I'm not going to buy an island with my podcast millions anytime soon, but it's fun. So we love doing it.
And it's the future.
Yeah. Do you think?
Yeah,
there's a lot of podcasts now, but
yeah, there are a lot of podcasts, but it's like blogging was in sort of 2012. Like everyone thinks they've got to have a podcast, but you know, you were pretty early.
Yeah,
and the ones that have got a foothold will keep growing incrementally. It's very hard to come in with a new podcast and cut through the noise.
I think so. But what's satisfying, we've got a nice little format, and people now ask us to do it, whereas there was a lot of peddling before to get people to do it.
When you had to try to explain to people what a podcast is.
Yeah, exactly. And there is some podcast fatigue. There's a few celebs now say, "Oh, I'm just going to say no to all the podcasts because I just can't handle how many people ask me to do their podcast." But
so you got the podcast in the custody.
Yeah.
I remember my first boss in magazines, Deborah Thomas, when I first started as a beauty editor, and I was 19 years old, and I wasn't called a beauty editor, I was called a beauty writer, and I was so wide-eyed because every day presents would arrive. Free makeup. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
And I remember her saying to me, remember that these invitations and these presents are not being sent to you, they're being sent to your job.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I never forgot it. And I told every beauty editor that I employed that when they started, and every editor that I've hired, I've said the same thing. And I think that then when I wasn't an editor, I wasn't that shocked when the tap just literally got turned off.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't the lipstick that I cared about, and I certainly wasn't going to the parties or the movie premieres, but it's more that just people who you think are your friends and not close friends, but like acquaintances and stuff, just you are dead to them. And the phone, for me, the phone just never rang after I left magazines. It just stopped. And that's part of why I had to start Mamma Mia.
I just think that's insane though, isn't it? It's awful because you're still a really... You know, you still have all those skills, and those stupid people who are treating you like you're dead don't know where you might end up. And
did that happen to you?
You
only had 2 weeks.
Well, no, I had about 4 months with some people, but actually I was pleasantly surprised / shocked that it wasn't. I mean, and I'm not talking about the freebies. We don't need the presents. No. You know, I've had enough of those. It's fine. But it's people returning emails or inviting me to things. I did have a couple of times where people would invite me to something. I'd say, that's really nice. Can I just tell you I'm not at Glamour anymore? Because I'm just, it's just a thought. And they were like, and maybe they wanted to go, oh, shit, really? And not invite me. But I was like, no, we want you there. We want so. But that was, that was a slightly awkward thing for a few weeks. But no, I actually had a lot of people reach out and offer me advice, offer me work. And I wonder if some of that is because I mean, God knows I ain't no Kim Kardashian, but I've got a reasonable Instagram following. So maybe that
it's
helps.
different now because no matter what job if you leave your job, you still take your podcast, your following, your social.
Yeah.
Back when I left, that wasn't the case. And I had a disastrous time in TV, so my reputation was pretty much slashed and burned with a few months.
What did you do?
Well, because I'd planned my exit from this disastrous TV job, I knew that I needed to be busy. I knew that I couldn't just wait for the phone to ring. I still thought that it would, and I was still pretty hurt and humiliated when it didn't. But I knew that I had to have something to throw myself into. So I had Mamma Mia ready to launch on the day that my resignation was announced. And so I threw myself into that. But I was pretty damaged from the way I'd exited and sort of what had happened in those preceding months. And, I suppose no one, when they're at the height of their career in an industry that seems solid at the time, like magazines, thinks that you can suddenly just be kicked to the curb and no one wants to return your calls.
Yeah.
But that's what happened to me.
Oh, it's shocking that. And it is, because the thing is, we all do the sorts of jobs where you can say, I always try to tell myself not to invest my whole identity in what I'm doing, but it's really hard because if you love what you're doing. Yeah, if you love what you're doing, it is personal. You take it all, it's so important to you, and it's so important that everybody thinks well of you and thinks you're doing a good job. So it's a real body blow, I think.
We've seen a lot of our magazine contemporaries, I was going to say fall by the wayside, but it is kind of like that. I mean, no one has this sort of graceful exit anymore. People usually stick around until their magazine is closed or until they're sacked and replaced with a younger, cheaper model. And so you've got a lot of women of our age, in our 40s, out there hustling who can't get back on staff. There are no more editor kind of positions. What have you learnt by sort of seeing that happen to other women before it happened to you?
I think that I tried. What do I think? I mean, basically, everybody I know who's the sort of person you described has always worked it out some way, and I find that really reassuring. Your reality might be different. You might not be the person being asked onto the podcast and the chat shows and all of that anymore, but you will still find fulfilling work. You will still find a way to carry on. And I think that what I am grateful to the Glamour experience for it, the final Glamour experience, is I was so scared of that day. I was so scared of it. And
now, you knew it was coming for a long time.
And I think that when it happens again, I don't think I will be as afraid of it. And Mia, honestly, if I have to go one day and work in a cafe, I will. It's like, do you know what I mean? It's like you could always do something.
I fantasize about that a lot.
I don't. I was a terrible waitress.
I wasn't a good waitress either, but I fantasize sometimes about going to work and then just coming home.
Yeah.
And being able to just do a job.
Exactly. So I think that, if one day I can't work in media anymore, I might be really sad about that, but it's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. God, we've all had friends die. We've all had friends be ill.
First world problems.
There is just more important things.
What's your job like now?
It's really fast paced. It's kind of exciting actually, because I'd never worked on a weekly before, and it's got a huge audience.
Doesn't the idea of a monthly sound quaint?
Well, it does.
Something
now.
That comes out once a month.
I know. What happened? I mean, just like that, and that used to be enough.
It seemed very busy, but honestly, the thought of having to do, I don't know, what were there, 20 stories in a magazine that came out once a month? That's what we produce just in written content on Mamma Mia in one day.
Yeah. No,
and we do about 20 podcast episodes a week.
It's gotten so much faster. But then I saw this news report once that this journalist from a TV show went around to this one street in England where they were still getting the paper delivered, and he said to this old woman, he said, well, that news you're reading now, though, everything's changed since then. Don't you want the more up to date? And she said, well, why do I have to know it now? And I loved her. I kind of wanted to hug her.
I love that.
So why do I need to? And it's like, we've told ourselves that that's what we need.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. I could, it's 52 covers a year, which is quite challenging. And I can't help it. It's a supplement free with the paper, but I can't help being my old newsstand girl and wanting to make it something that I'd be proud to try and sell on the newsstand. And it's just great to be able to react to things. It's great to be able to see a news story and get something in relatively quickly. But then obviously we've got our website as well, so that's sort of like churning out stuff every day. But I did that on Glamour, so I don't feel like even at Glamour, I wasn't sort of like having this quaint monthly timetable. We had sort of like daily deadlines for different things as well.
Thanks so much, Jo.
Wow, God, I can rant on, can't I?
Bloody love it. Bloody love
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Come back to Australia, will
all right.
you?
Yeah, I'd love to.
You know, I try to tempt you back about once every 18 months.
Keep trying.
I never have
One day
enough
I
money. I need to go and busk and get some more money.
Yeah.
The bloody Aussie dollar.
But that's the thing. It's like nobody believes me. Sydney is so much more expensive than London.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I have to try to tempt you back through your daughter. Show her the sunshine.
Yep, she does love it. She does love it. I would love to come back. One day. Thank you for having me, though.
Thank you for listening to No Filter. Jo actually has a podcast herself. It's called Is It Just Me? And you can listen to it in your favourite podcast app, and we'll also pop a link in our show notes. If you'd like something else to listen to, can I suggest a podcast about the people who have disrupted the advertising industry in the same way that digital has disrupted the magazine industry? It's called Social Squad, and it's about influencers. Tully Smythe, who is an influencer, on the latest episode sits down with Sophie Keisha. She's formerly known as an Insta, you might have heard of her, as the Young Mummy. And she recently split from her husband, and that was a huge story. And these are the women that are really single-handedly changing the face of women's media and of advertising. They're really big disruptors. You can follow the links to listen to that episode in our show notes. No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and you can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Mia Friedman, or you can sign up for my newsletter. It's the only place I write these days at miafriedman.com.au. I'll see you on Mamma Mia.